It's Sunday, January 25, 2026. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. Our guest today is a lawyer, public defender, and author. Her book on the criminal court system and smarter public safety solutions, called The Price of Mercy, will be published next month and is available for pre-order now. Emily Galvin-Almanza, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
It's so great to be here.
Emily, let's start with what's happening in the world, which is that Donald Trump has been threatening it, and the rest of the world has been kind of struggling to know how serious he is and how to respond. And obviously, with Davos this week, he made a speech that kind of put a lot of people's minds at rest, because he was threatening taking Greenland by force, and he's now said that's not happening, but there is some kind of a deal, which he kind of wasn't very clear about, to say that it's now been dealt with. So we're very light on detail as you and I record this. But what we do know is that Donald Trump does change his opinion on a dime, and that at any point anything could change. Do you think European leaders recognize how potentially dangerous he is as the leader of the free world?
I think they have recognized it for quite some time, but I think a lot is now changing on the ground. So, for example, one of the major critiques of the Democratic Party at the end of President Biden's term was that they were not adequately addressing his mental state, and that his mental state may have actually been far worse behind closed doors than people were acknowledging publicly. We are so far beyond that point with President Trump in terms of watching his mental state visibly decline. I mean, just as a human, watching his speeches over the last 3 months and watching how much more frequently he's losing the thread, not saying what he seems to be meaning to say, forgetting things, falling asleep in meetings. So leaders who I think had made a calculus previously that the American president was manipulable in specific, consistent ways, as in, if you flatter him, he'll do what you want. If you're the last person to talk to him about a given topic, you're much likelier to get him around to your position until he talks to somebody else. We saw this so much. We saw like the most strange, obsequious moments from world leaders previously, praising him, patting him on the head, all in an attempt, and I think a reasonable attempt, to make him do things that were good for the world, or at least for the community of allies that the United States has previously cultivated. And now what I think we're seeing are these leaders coming to terms with the fact that there is no longer a consistent strategy to managing the American president. I don't know that his inner circle still has a consistent strategy to manage the American president. But certainly those who only see him occasionally, who are not within his inner circle, who are leaders of foreign nations, at this point have to come to terms with the fact that he is unpredictable, perhaps even to himself. It's not clear that he knows what he's going to do on any given topic at any given time. I mean, it's not clear that he knows what country he's talking about
Right.
when he's talking about another country.
Yeah.
So at this point, I do think they're a little behind the ball. I mean, I don't know to what extent there have already been communications between world leaders who want to remain strongly in alliance and coordinated in their response to this incredible threat of having a potentially really enfeebled person who previously was already dangerously strident and now is dangerously strident in terms of personality, but enfeebled in terms of mentality and strategy at the helm of a world power, and no one in his party ready to acknowledge the reality that we're all seeing.
It strikes me that he does everything in reverse. So when it came to Greenland, he looks at a big map and sees this kind of big, kind of icy area and is like, right, I want that, but doesn't make any inquiries as to the legality of it or whether or not, there was a military presence there, the history, understanding the history. I mean, so offensive and abusive, referring to Denmark as just not having any kind of legal ownership, considering that, it's literally been almost 1,000 years. And so do you think that firing all of the kind of legal minds and all of the adults that were working at the White House and only being surrounded by these kind of far right nationalists who subscribe to the kind of same thinking that he does is the dangerous bit? Like, what's the most dangerous bit here? Is it the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding of how the world works, certainly when it comes to trade and diplomacy, or is it something else?
It's the question of who he actually serves. Because certainly he's not serving the American people. The American people just had their healthcare premiums double because our government couldn't figure out how to prevent that from happening, and our government has not yet managed to build us a functioning public healthcare system. The American people have watched prices go up and not really come to terms with the fact that there is no downward ratchet. These prices are not coming back down. The American people were promised some form of affordability and have not been given it. Debt is rising up to people's eyeballs. And to have a president discuss paying like $700 billion for Greenland at a moment when people are hanging on economically by their fingernails and wealth inequality is increasing, it's extraordinarily offensive. So you have to ask yourself, he's certainly not serving the people. There are no people who would rather, there are few people who would rather that money be spent on some other country than on our own. And I think even among his supporters, many of them feel that they would rather the funds be spent on our own domestic needs and interests. So you have to ask yourself, who is he serving? I don't think that it's as simple as he doesn't understand a Decatur map and thinks Greenland is a lot bigger than it is, although that's a very, very funny trope. I think realistically, obviously, the Arctic is an important strategic point in our global moment.
Right. But Russia isn't trying to take Greenland, and
we have a base
China
in
isn't trying to take
it. I will say this, you never know what Russia's going to try to take. Right. But even so, we have a base. We have a military base in Greenland. Greenland would let us put like 4 more bases there. If we wanted to blanket Greenland in bases, that could be a really fruitful conversation. I think the bigger question is this an international fumble driven by the manipulation of some other foreign leader? Perhaps another country that's been really good at manipulating American interests in the past? Or is this a manipulation by private interests who are very interested in a sort of techno-autocracy future in which the aquifers of Greenland would make for a fabulous data center base? Is this sort of a like Musk and Thiel interest driving the show here? And the reason I say that's the most dangerous is when you don't have a government that is actually representing the interests of its people. And at this point, you can argue that many of our past administrations have not well represented our interests. But this is different because this is an overt, complete unhinging of our representative democracy from the interests of those it represents. That's what's really scary to me. We see the same thing in sort of the outcomes of the Doge intervention, in that you now have Doge members being referred for Hatch Act violations because of their own personal entanglements that might have resulted in them being incentivized to procure and distribute Social Security data. Like, did our government get burgled by Doge people? Did our personal data get burgled by Doge people because a private interest was driving the governmental choices rather than a legitimate governmental strategy? Maybe. I mean, did the departments that contract with Elon Musk experience different outcomes from Doge than departments that don't contract with SpaceX and with Tesla? Like, that's where this is existentially threatening to our democratic structure.
Do you think the people who voted for him, not just staunch Trumpers, people in the cult of Trump, but the traditional conservatives and people who can't bring themselves to vote for Democrats because they're lifelong conservatives but might not like Trump so much, and there's plenty of those, at what point do they give up on their allegiance? At what point do they realize that, as you say, none of his policies are beneficial to them? And we're seeing that now with the polling over ICE kidnapping people and violently, executing people in the case of Renee Good, that is not what they voted for. And so as they start to see a picture build of Trump celebrating all of these great investments, but no actual jobs, and a claim to deport violent criminals and rapists and people from insane asylums, and then basically taking American citizens off the streets because they have the wrong color skin. I mean, there will come a flashpoint, surely, where those people are saying, okay, we're done now.
I think one mistake I see people on the left making a lot is assuming that the right is more of a monolith than it actually is. Because my experience is that different people on the right have really, really different priorities in terms of what they're actually voting for. And there are people who will hold their nose and tolerate mass brutality in the interest of what they perceive to be a stronger economic plan. There are people who are legitimately very, very interested in making America exclusive to people they perceive to be Americans, which I think there's often a racial tinge there, to say the least. There are people who are taken in by the idea that prosperity will reach them personally if they simply vote for the person who is verbally promising them prosperity rather than outlining a plan to get there. And that means that different people require different forms of information in order to change their perspective. For many people, that information is hard to come by simply because this administration is very, very comfortable pushing out its own narrative, even if that narrative is completely counterfactual. I recently was thinking about this because, you know, when we've had a few times now, it's not just Renee Good's case. There have been several times where a horrifying video of ICE activity will emerge into the public sphere, and we will immediately get a statement from ICE saying that our eyes are deceiving us, essentially, that what we perceive in the video is not at all what happened, and they give some narrative that paints the ICE officer as completely good and the other person as completely bad. It's with these like cartoonish morality plays of dissembling ICE reimaginings of these videos. And it's not the first time I've seen this. My first trial as a public defender was a case where the incident was caught completely on video. And I remember watching the video and thinking, my client didn't do anything wrong. Where's the crime? Surely, I was a young public defender, so I was like, oh my God, I must be missing something. There must be a crime I'm just somehow not able to see on this video. And indeed, I got the police officer up on the witness stand and I was cross-examining her, saying, I was playing the video at the same time, saying, can you show me, please, where the crime happens on this video? And she was saying, it's right there. And me and the jury were all like leaning, looking for it, and it's just not there. And I had to learn a lesson in that trial, which we won because people believe their own eyes, thankfully. And the lesson was, I have often underestimated the degree to which people in power think they can convince others to listen to their narratives over and at the exclusion of the evidence that we perceive ourselves. It continues to shock me. And that's the theme of ICE. So the Renee Good video reached a level of saturation in our population that almost nothing else has reached. A strong majority of Americans have seen these videos. Will this move them? Will other videos like this move? Will the video of the elderly gentleman being hauled out of his house in nothing but a blanket, he who turned out to be a citizen, or the woman with a disability who was on her way to a medical appointment, hauled out, carried by her arms and legs, again, only to be like cleared by ICE and like dumped somewhere a few hours later? Will all of these incidents cause people to stop listening to ICE's communications department and stop choosing to believe a lie about rampant criminals invading our country over the truth that they can see in front of them, which is masked agents of the state attacking innocent people? I don't know. It depends on how much conservatism is part of their identity. And there is a degree to which I think people who are trying to hold on to an identity they value will choose to believe even a nakedly transparent lie over the evidence of their own eyes.
And pretty much everybody that you have described, and I want to throw that young boy who worked in Target into the mix as well, which was also a very shocking video to watch. And he also was just dumped, a kid, really terrified and traumatized. But these are all minority groups, whether they be people of color or LGBTQ plus. And, we've since learned that the Renee Good seems to be some kind of an attack on a gay couple in a way. Kind of, it certainly felt that way. But as you say, there was no crime. In all of these situations, there was no crime. And I am hoping that people kind of wake up to that. But I also recognize what you said at the beginning, which is that progressive people probably have an idealistic view of how Trump supporters and MAGA Republicans view the world. Let's go back to the Davos speech that Trump made for a second, because it was hailed as one of the most abusive, offensive, and racist speeches. And he specifically mentioned the Somalis in Minnesota and talked about this $19 billion kind of theft of public money, which is being investigated and, of course, will probably come to nothing. But ultimately, it was a right-wing influencer that went to Minnesota, that went to one of these childcare centers when it was closed, and then made a viral video saying, well, they're getting all that money and there's nobody here. The fact that Trump kind of allowed and accounts kind of retweeted that, and so allowed that to go viral, and then it got used as policy, is another example of the detail is irrelevant. We'll worry about the detail later. We'll just go for the big shiny object first. And so in the speech, Trump's use of language regarding the Somali community, of which it is the largest in America, in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, to an assembled multi-race, multi-faith, multinational audience in Davos was extremely shocking. It's not the kind of language you would expect to hear from even a kind of leader of a fringe party, let alone the president of the United States. Do you think that the European community and the Davos community, do you think they recognize that racism is very much at the heart of so much of Trump's policies? And that is another reason maybe to distance themselves from America.
I would be really disheartened to think they hadn't realized that already. I mean, how many
they keep giving him the benefit of the doubt. That's what I'm saying. Is it's like, how many times do you allow? I mean, he did it at the United Nations as well, and we heard it at the Munich Security Conference from J.D. Vance, and we heard it at the NATO meeting with Pete Hegseth. I mean, this extreme racism and far right nationalist language.
I think that they have given him the benefit of the doubt publicly for a while. And this goes back to my opinion that they thought that he was manipulable in some way, controllable, right, manageable. We are living in a country where the department head in our government gave a speech from behind a podium that said, "One of ours, all of yours." And one of her deputies is essentially, as far as I can tell from his clothing, like cosplaying as a Nazi officer 24/7. And we elevate people who have these aesthetic or verbal dog whistles connecting them to the legacy of far right extremist, eugenicist thinking. This isn't new with Trump. I mean, look at his rhetoric from the Central Park 5 case decades ago in New York, in which he was essentially calling for the execution of innocent Black boys. Let's look at, all of the history of how he has structured fear against immigrants, amplifying completely unverifiable and verifiably false tropes like gang members taking over a building in Aurora, Colorado, which the sheriff of Aurora said isn't actually happening, or, people who are immigrants eating cats and dogs. Again, something completely debunked. you can't miss the fact that again and again, this administration comes up with falsehoods that invoke white nationalist feelings in their supporters and consistently otherize and denigrate people of color and minority groups generally. Like you can't miss the sort of like fashy fashion, by which I mean fashy short for fascist fashion, and like, snuggling with Nazi ideology. If world leaders are now undergoing a moment of calculus, whereas before they thought, the leader of the quote unquote free world is snuggling with Nazi ideas, but we think that there's a redeemable path here to collaboration and fruitful allyhood. And now it's become so explicit and so unavoidable and so visible in the violence in our own streets that they can't make that calculus any longer. And now they've decided for their own political future, it is better to simply acknowledge what is happening. I think that's very healthy. I think that's very good. I mean, one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is that the mask off moment, like most people didn't find the mask very convincing all along, but let's call this a mask off moment where the white nationalist rhetoric is simply becoming much, much, much more overt. That is very healthy because even if everyone knew what was going on all along, now we are stripping away people's strategic impetus to ignore it. We are making it much harder for people to continue avoiding action on. So, truth is good.
And we've heard from some Trump supporters through various social media memes, but also there's been these kind of round tables, these kind of round table interview sequences with kind of left-leaning commentators kind of taking on large numbers of Trump supporters. And some of these individuals were very proud of their support for Nazi ideology and were very proudly kind of far-right nationalists. And they saw nothing really wrong with it. The stigma of being in support of Nazis was just not there with these people. And I found that particularly shocking, but it seems to have come and gone. But I mean, you refer to, one of the henchmen of Kristi Noem wearing a Gestapo style overcoat. I mean, these things are not by accident. They are by design. And they don't just kind of happen in a vacuum. Many of these individuals have even gone to kind of cut their hair in Nazi style. So we have to recognize that. We have to see it. We can't turn a blind eye, and we have to respond to it, surely.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me because as an attorney, I acknowledge that everyone has the right to their views, no matter how abhorrent I may find those views. Everybody has the right to their views. That doesn't mean that I have to like them, hang out with them, support them, say nice things about them. I also have the right to my freedom of speech to express my views about what I'm seeing. And so I think we're in an interesting moment where, because of the administration's dramatic show of power in its first year, there were many groups that previously have been stigmatized, again, allowed their First Amendment freedoms, but socially stigmatized because people don't like Nazi ideas, for the most part. Those groups had this sort of rush of feeling unleashed, feeling empowered, feeling that perhaps the stigma about their beliefs is gone. I don't think our society has actually changed that much. I don't think Americans are suddenly more likely to embrace Nazi ideals. I think what we're going to see in this year is people becoming much, much, much more comfortable with pushback. Because one of the things we've seen, just take, for example, the action of ICE across the country. One of the things we've seen is that even in the face of extraordinary brutality, and, again, with my lawyer hat on, wildly unconstitutional, lawless behavior from an arm of the state, people have realized that protest and resistance and social condemnation is still effective. Like, how many people out there do you think who work for ICE go on first dates and tell their date that they work for ICE versus having like a totally obfuscating, like, oh, you know, I work for, it's a government, you know, bureaucracy job. Like, I think this is highly relevant right now as well, because the backlash to all of this sort of overt, almost celebratory embrace of fascist and fascist adjacent culture and ideas, I think has really meaningful material impact on this administration's ability to succeed. For example, I am very curious about how ICE hiring is going right now. Because certainly if you listen to the numbers put out by the government, I'm sure they will tell you that it's like going hand over fist. It's fabulous. And they're paying people $1 million and all this stuff. I don't currently trust those numbers. I will, as someone who really, really relies on data that is double checked and coming from a credible source, I'm currently not particularly ready to trust data coming out of this administration, particularly the Department of Homeland Security, as necessarily strictly accurate. So are people actually signing up for these jobs in a world where we're hearing about even legislation to ban people who've been in ICE from becoming law enforcement officers later? Are people willing to sign up for these jobs that you can't tell people about on a first date or like maybe even a fifth date?
But if there's no other jobs, and if they've got rid of all other federal jobs, they're trying to reduce the size of the federal government, and there's $50,000 sign-up bonuses, people are going to make exceptions, aren't they?
I think they were. I think they absolutely were. The calculus is different now, because the same way that everybody who's not involved in ICE is watching these videos of brutality, people who are considering signing up for that job are also watching these videos of brutality. And so now the question isn't, could I like suck it up and like arrest some immigrants and deal with that when I go home at night? The question is, am I going to be put in a position where I'm asked to shoot one of my neighbors in the chest?
Yeah.
Am I going to be put in a position where I'm asked to drag an elderly man out of his house in freezing weather with no clothing? Am I going to be asked to beat up a kid after ripping him out of his job? Like, that's really different. Maybe it's naive, but I think that there are many people who will act strongly in their own economic interest to a point. But being asked to brutalize their neighbors physically is a very different ask than simply taking an unpleasant job with a high bonus.
The international community, not least at the Davos Economic Forum, but certainly the Europeans, NATO member states, they are watching and they are seeing these videos. And so, this stuff is not exclusive to the US. It has been broadcast around the world and people are horrified. And obviously Europeans have more of a historic trauma associated with the Second World War and with Nazi occupation. And so to see these ICE officers behaving like Nazis, what does that do for countries that were former allies that Trump has now kind of put into second or third position behind Russia, for example, or North Korea, or just countries that he favors? Because going forward, we're already seeing Mark Carney in Canada, who gave a rather brilliant speech at Davos, talking about forming alliances without America, and that the US is not the superpower that it used to be, and that it is possible for the rest of the world to operate without this reliance on the United States. I mean, and surely the Nazification of law enforcement is having an effect on a lot of these views and the desire to uncouple in this way.
Certainly. It delegitimizes our status as a nation with whom people would want to have dealings. I mean, like, that is amplified by the fact that our dealings are rather inconsistent right now. I will also say that, like, this is the most amazing branding rehab for China. Like, China does not have its own perfect human rights record. Let's be very clear. And that hasn't been as visible because we're not seeing videos of brutality emerging from the Chinese right now.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's not happening.
Well, it's
really
illegal to share that and to film it, isn't it? And I suppose that's another
it is a very
example.
Right. What I'm saying is that it's interesting to watch world leaders who are highly educated people, equally as aware as you or I or anyone else, perhaps more aware because they're in government and have privileged access to information of whatever human rights abuses are happening right now in a nation that they will choose to embrace over the United States, probably less because we are currently morally abhorrent and more because at least their offers are economically and sort of contractually consistent. When they're entering into agreements, the agreements are heavily negotiated, but then at least executed as described, I would assume, to an extent that we are not currently capable of. What are we doing? Are we going to have tariffs next week? Are we not? How high are they going to be? Are we going to go to war with somebody? Nobody can tell you what the United States is going to do. And so international leaders choosing more consistent partners is not about, I don't think, our increasingly obvious human rights violations. The United States has had its own legacy of human rights violations, I should point out, before these incredibly splashy, visible ones in our present moment. I do think that the high degree of visibility to our loss of any moral high ground is giving a lot of international leaders the push they need to take more economically consistent and advantageous deals.
We heard from Gavin Newsom just ahead of Davos, and he was very critical of European leaders for not pushing back more on Donald Trump and why they're cozying up to him. And if it's obvious that he's a dictator, that why they seem to kind of be giving him so much rope. Do you think that European leaders would benefit from actually standing up and saying no? Because we've seen that with Carney in Canada, and we've seen that with Sheinbaum in Mexico, that actually Trump does respond to strength.
Look at his meeting with Mamdani.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic example of the fact that you don't actually need to capitulate to Trump to gain his warmth, cooperation. I mean, it was a fascinating meeting because here's a guy who, even in the meeting, is reaffirming all of the negative things that he has said about Trump. And Trump is laughing about it because he respects the confidence, the show of will. I think it's obviously contextually different when he's trying to get somebody to do something in a deal and they won't do it. I think there's a specific backlash there. But I think in general, I think a lot of world leaders have underestimated the degree to which a sort of quasi-pugilistic approach, like get in the ring with him, might work better than an obsequious flattering.
Because Newsom said that the whole "we're going to take Greenland by force" was just posturing, and that actually the reaction from European leaders was way too kind of overreactive, and consequently world markets reacted too. And actually that he didn't intend to put troops on the ground in Greenland ever. And now that he's backpedaled on it, it kind of suggests that maybe the whole thing was a ruse and that we all fell for it.
Well, who's talking about the Epstein Files right now?
Yeah. Good point. And maybe we should talk about the Epstein
millions
Files.
Of pages that they've apparently found that they need to go through. Like
right.
The millions of pages that emerged after a thorough DOJ investigation of not one, but two criminal cases arising from this particular body of evidence. And now there's millions more pages that are out of compliance with the law in that they have not been turned over yet. There's a lot to be said that we are not currently focusing on because we are seeing brutal law enforcement and weird threats of international incursion following an actual international incursion. When we, swooped the leader of Venezuela, who admittedly nobody in Venezuela wanted to have there anymore either, but still handled particularly poorly in terms of our adherence to international law and our ability, again, to hold our role as a world leader.
And leaving his deputy just to kind of carry on meant that the Maduro regime effectively remains. It's just so weird. Again, it's almost as if from a showmanship perspective, he thinks about the kind of visual of a kidnapping of a leader, but doesn't kind of do the prep. Doesn't kind of
I think he doesn't seem like a homework guy.
Right.
Doesn't seem like a details man.
Yeah. Worry about it afterwards.
I think my favorite part was watching Marco Rubio stand behind him as Trump announced that like either Marco Rubio or Pete Hegseth was now in charge of Venezuela.
Yeah.
And both of them seeming a little surprised to be suddenly in charge of Venezuela. Not super thought out in terms of a strategic plan for the aftermath. Other than his very effective plan to receive a physical Nobel Prize, even if it wasn't actually awarded to him. He did get his gold medallion that he really, 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 really wanted.
Yeah.
So.
Even if it meant breaking into the Louvre to get one, I'm sure he would have done that too. We have
that
to
is a crime he has not committed yet,
yes,
to my knowledge. That's only very, very good-looking Frenchmen seem to do that these days.
Let's take a quick break. I want to come back and talk a little bit about the Epstein Files, as you mentioned it so essentially. And also I want to look to RFK Jr.'s plan that we should all be eating more meat and how agriculture might not be able to keep up with that, but the climate crisis will be affected too. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. You want to eat better, but you have zero time and zero energy to make it happen. Factor doesn't ask you to meal prep or follow recipes. It just removes the entire problem. 2 minutes, real food, done. For me, cooking healthy meals was quite a chore. You're not failing at healthy eating, you're failing at having 3 extra hours every night. Factor is already made by chefs, designed by dietitians, and delivered to your door. You heat it for 2 minutes and eat. Lean proteins, colourful vegetables, whole food ingredients, healthy fats. The stuff that you'd make if you had the time. No refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners, no refined seed oils. 100 rotating meals every week, high protein, calorie smart, Mediterranean, GLP-1 support, ready to eat salads. New Muscle Pro collection for strength and recovery. You pick what fits your goals for healthier eating, calorie management, more protein, whatever you're actually trying to do. Always fresh and never frozen and ready in 2 minutes. No prep, no cleanup, no mental load, not motivation to eat better, just elimination of the reason that you don't. Head to factormeals.com/weekend50off and use code weekend50off to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. Make healthier eating easy with Factor. Channel that fresh start energy of the new year and finally launch your business with Shopify. 2026 is the year to rewrite your story, own your future, and make your entrepreneurial dreams come true. Start your business with Shopify in 2026 and become who you're meant to be. 2026 is the year you launch your business, the year you transform into an entrepreneur, founder, boss. One powerful move puts your future firmly in your hands, starting a business with Shopify. Maybe you've got an idea you can't shake, a craft that everyone tells you to sell, a store you've already designed in your head. Well, with Shopify, 2026 is when you finally make it happen. Shopify gives you everything you need to sell online and in person. Millions of entrepreneurs have already made this leap, from household names to first-time business owners just getting started. Shopify gives you all the tools to easily build your dream store. Choose from hundreds of beautiful templates that you can customize to match your brand. Setup is fast with Shopify's built-in AI tools that write product descriptions and headlines and help you edit product photos. Marketing is built in too. Create email and social campaigns that reach customers wherever they scroll. As you grow, Shopify grows with you. Handle more orders, expand to new markets, and do it all from the same dashboard. In 2026, stop waiting and start selling with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend.
Go to shopify.com/weekend. That's shopify.com/weekend. Hear your first this new year with Shopify by your side.
We're back on the Weekend Show with Emily Galvin-Almanza. I'm Anthony Davis. Emily, before the break, you touched on the Epstein Files and really the length that Donald Trump would go to delay or just turn everyone's attention away from this insanely vast child sex trafficking ring that is clearly being covered up by the Justice Department. Would he go as far as kidnapping a member of a sovereign nation to distract from it, or threatening to put troops on the ground and snatch Greenland? I mean, is he that crazy? Is that what we're dealing with?
These are things he wants to do anyway. I mean, he loved describing the commando, blow by blow. It was almost like a Tom Cruise movie he was describing of the Venezuelan incursion. And which was actually really funny to watch as a lawyer, because it was very clear that in order to prevent any feeling that Congress would ever need to be involved in anything they wanted to do in Venezuela, Marco Rubio was trying very hard to make this a law enforcement operation to bring someone in to essentially non-consensually extradite, which is not a thing, a person who's wanted for, a federal case in New York, who just happens to be really, really far away. So Rubio's working so hard to couch this as like a legitimate legal matter. And then Trump comes in and just uses every war comparison he possibly can. I think he compared it to World War II. He loves this stuff. This is fun for him. It's not a hardship. It's not a hardship to do bombastic things that he really likes doing that happen to also distract people from a topic he clearly doesn't want to talk about, because when someone in a factory he was visiting called him a pedophile protector, the president of the United States of America flipped a guy off. I don't think any president, to my knowledge, has ever engaged in rude gestures towards the citizenry. But clearly he's touchy about it. He acts out when it's brought up. And I don't think that he's struggling with the choice to do highly attention-getting things that also demonstrate his power. I think that he likes being seen as unpredictable because, as someone who feels that he's a great negotiator, I think one can also feel that unpredictability is a strength in a negotiating setting.
Well, that's a mobster tactic, isn't it?
Yeah, I haven't seen the actual art of the deal. As someone who teaches negotiation in a law school class, not sure I've really seen some of the most artful aspects of negotiation in this administration, but certainly I've seen the most bombastic tactics that, yes, are often associated with cultures of force and leverage and pressure rather than more legitimate negotiations.
Why is it important that we keep referring to the Epstein Files and trying to take people back to it? Because obviously, aside from the obvious, the victims deserving justice, is it just about unseating Trump, or is there a kind of a larger force at play here? Obviously, for many, many partisans, yes, it would be very helpful to them to have this incredibly damaging category of information. It would also be very vindicating in a world where Republicans have told a lot of lies. The Hillary Clinton pizza parlor sex ring thing. Obviously, there's a little bit of feeling of turnabout. That is not why it's important to me. The reason why it's important to me is nerdy, but I think vital to the structure of our government. The Department of Justice is not the president's personal lawyer. The White House counsel isn't even the president's personal lawyer. The roles we have for lawyers in government are really specifically cabined. The White House counsel represents the interests of the White House. The Department of Justice represents the interests of the American people. And it's really important that in every presidency,
the Department of Justice not seem to be working for the president, because sometimes the interest of the American people and the interest of the president will diverge. And under those circumstances, we need an independent Department of Justice, the same way we need, inspectors general, who can hold the government accountable to the people. And that's what we're losing here. The Epstein case is an iteration of a bigger loss. I mean, not that I have to say, not that anything could be bigger than the loss the victims have experienced. But as a nation, when we have a government that has no mechanism for the interests of the people to remain represented, even under circumstances of corruption, no self-checking ability, no, safety switches, no safety nets, we are losing our ability as a people to meaningfully control those who claim to represent us. And so to me, watching the Department of Justice veer off the path of representing the people into a path where, at times it really does seem like just an elaborate pursuit of the president's personal interests, is devastating. It's absolutely devastating. It represents the much larger loss of the structure which made our government legitimate.
There was so much criticism of the former Attorney General, Merrick Garland, taking his sweet merry time to bring Donald Trump and his associates to account. But what we're seeing now is entirely different, isn't it? We're seeing Trump directing the Justice Department to go after his perceived enemies. For you as a public defender, how does it feel when you see Pam Bondi kind of get up there and talk in the weirdest way, she's like a college student, arguing in a kind of debating club or something? It's just very childlike, very weird, and so obviously partisan that they're not even trying to hide it. So how do you feel when you see that?
I feel like what I'm watching is what is possible when you strip away civics education for millions of American young people. Because the reason her attitude and her positionality and her allegiance to the president hits you and me as weird is that we know that her role is supposed to be the people's lawyer, right?
Right.
And so we know how far she has diverged from what that role is supposed to be. I will say this. I don't need that role to be boring. I don't need that role to be sleepy or slow or never do anything aggressive or, not do anything dramatic. I'm fine with dramatic action in pursuit of justice. I actually think lawyers could afford to be a little less boring. But cravenly in pursuit of the individual goals of the president, that is appalling if you know what her role is supposed to be. But if you are a student who has never had the advantage of a real civics education, and you've grown up, there are young people who have had Trump as president for much of their lives. There are soon-to-be voters for whom the presidency they've experienced is largely this sort of reality TV personality presidency. And without the benefit of a civics education to show them how not normal this is, I'm not sure that they can feel how far off the mark we are and how deep in really dangerous, existentially dangerous territory we are. I'm not saying it's because we have crappy government teachers. We have the best teachers in this country. We have amazing teachers in this country. We just have far too few of them, and we compensate them really poorly. And there are far too many ways in which schools are let off the hook to not provide these foundational pieces of education. That's deliberate. These are deliberate local policy choices to rob students of the education to which they should be entitled, because it advantages government officials who want to have slippery governments like this. So I'm saying it because I hope to see young people outraged about that to which they have not been given access. I want to see them demand it. And
it devalues America on the world stage as well, that it can't keep its own house in order. And the corruption is so obvious now. I'm sure in previous years, certainly, under Nixon and goodness knows who else, at least they tried to hide the corruption. But what we're seeing is a very overt, kind of clear operation, a corrupt operation in action. And that doesn't bode well for justice going forward, because it means that victims of any crimes, not least child sex trafficking and sexual abuse, but any crime that American citizens might find themselves involved with, will remove that kind of trust that maybe they once had, that they will be seen right by the Justice Department.
Yeah, I think when I think about what we need next, like as a reparative tactic, it's really hard to figure out. I mean, the fact that the president, I was reading an article suggesting that the president had been personally enriched to the tune of over $1 billion since taking office just a year ago. And the fact that that is like super low on the list of scandals about which anyone is talking, really tells you how dire things are. I worry about the normalization of that. I worry, it's interesting. Representative Ocasio-Cortez said something really smart a couple days ago, which she says smart things all the time. But the thing that I'm going to talk about was, she pointed out that the next president is going to have to use some of the tools that this administration has given itself in order to dismantle the harm that has been done through these tools. And she said that it's unfair to expect one side to wield an outsized amount of illegitimate power and let the other side refuse to wield that power for the sake of a return to legitimacy. I have really mixed feelings about it. I mean, certainly on the front of personal enrichment, we want a next president that does not personally enrich themselves. We would like the Hatch Act to someday have some sort of enforcement power that people care about.
But it's that hypocrisy that is so unpalatable, especially when you hear Kristi Noem referring to kind of legal migrants, people working their way through the kind of system. And when it is the administration that is so obviously breaking the law, and Trump enriching himself as you describe. I mean, you read 1 billion, I read 5 billion, when you take the crypto into account. I mean, it's extreme, not least receiving a Boeing 747 from the Qatari, from the nation of Qatar. I mean, it suggests that the corruption is so overt that why is Trump's criminality better than an immigrant who steals food and gets caught for it? It really, to me, it just kind of highlights that it's every man for himself, and that setting a standard for how to live in this country needs to come from the very top, and currently it isn't.
It does, and going back to Ocasio-Cortez's perspective, I think we have to differentiate between different forms of power and different forms of hypocrisy. I think that we've seen, for example, the Mamdani administration do sweeping things right off the bat and utilize power in a way that we don't usually see Democrats utilizing power to just get stuff done. I think that absolutely everyone is in agreement that we need to see more of that, even if it involves using tools created by this government in their weird, creative ways, to make really good things happen for ordinary people. That being said, the risk of inflaming the very hypocritical pressure points created by this administration. For example, this administration claims that its political prosecutions are only being done in response to political prosecutions carried out against President Trump. And that the Biden administration was actually the originator of all these political prosecutions, which is a sort of rich thing of saying, like, any criminal allegations against me are clearly purely political. And also many of them were seemingly founded in court. And so I'm going to engage in prosecutions which, while perhaps nakedly political, also don't seem to be succeeding because there may be no evidentiary basis for them. If in the next administration, there's then a response of successful prosecutions because there is a factual basis for them, that is not going to change the mind of any of his supporters who believe that all of these prosecutions are merely retaliatory tactics in a vast political game.
Right. The retribution is a legitimate reason to kind of go after people.
Or that it's expected. I don't think anyone's going to say, I think if you asked the American people, could we just end all of the dramatic, retributive, witch hunt tactics?
Yeah.
I actually think you might find some consensus. The hard part is to do so involves a lack of accountability for people who've actually engaged in wrongdoing and harm. I'm of two minds about that.
Let's just go back to Davos for a second, because Trump tried to lecture the audience that the climate crisis is a hoax, that any countries that use wind turbines, which he calls windmills, are will not make as much money, that they're much poorer countries because of it. He lied about China, claiming they make them, but they don't use them. I mean, he obviously has his own views about green energy. Some say it stems from the view at his Scottish golf course where he could see wind turbines and he lost a legal case to have them removed. But that aside, the US is missing out on a huge green revolution where thousands of jobs could be created and a large, a huge movement is there to generate green, clean energy. So the US is being left behind. Certainly, Europe and China very much ahead on this stuff. Yeah. But you've also got AI, which again, something that Trump is investing heavily in, which is having a huge effect on the climate crisis by nature of the additional need for water and the pollutants that are going to be put out just generating that energy. And then that brings me to our next topic, which is RFK Jr. and his desire to change the guidelines on diet, urging Americans to eat far more meat and dairy products. And that in itself will come at a major cost to the planet via huge swathes of habitat raised for farmland, millions of tons of extra planet heating emissions too. To me, I mean, it's just bonkers. The whole thing is bonkers. We've been hearing, eat less meat, eat meat alternatives for years. And they've literally just taken everything that we know as true and correct and turned it on its head. And this is somebody who purports to be a kind of, a very health conscious individual in RFK Jr.
Yeah, he purports.
How is this going to play out, do you think? Do you think Americans are going to eat less meat because he says so?
No. I mean, did you follow the food pyramid? Did any of us follow the food pyramid? Did anybody eat like 12 servings of bread a day or whatever insane thing the government recommended previously? No. I mean, look, I think that if you look at RFK Jr., and you say that man is the paragon of health, that's what I'd like my body to look like someday.
Right.
I think you're probably in a pretty stark minority. I don't think that there's anybody out there who really thinks that this guy knows everything about everything when it comes to the health of our bodies. I do think that he is leveraging a particularly strong anti-vax movement. I think that people who are into, a carnivore diet or a caveman diet or rubbing beef tallow all over themselves, like people are doing that anyway. That's a personal choice. I think all of the stuff you've described to me is much more governed by capitalism than by our government. Here's my argument in favor of this position. So first of all, I think people are eating what they are told to eat by Instagram ads much more than what they're told to eat by RFK Jr.
Yeah.
I think that people live in communities that create health trends that flow through them, like methylene blue or ivermectin or whatever else, not getting a measles shot. He can inflame that. He can confirm that for people. He can say, he can either imply or expressly say that he agrees. But that doesn't mean that the majority of people are being pressured in that direction. The majority of people are being pressured in the direction of protein bar companies that want to sell us protein bars and ancient grain bowls that want us to take care of our microbiome. And like, it's all about what we're being sold and what we're willing to buy. And that's governing people's choices much more than any governmental advice we're being given. I think though, and this is encouraging, I think the same is true of green energy. Trump hates windmills because the windmills are winning. Like every time he tries to shut down a wind farm, the company who's building the wind farm and who's already invested billions of dollars in the wind farm litigates, and a judge says, yeah, you can't shut that down, actually. This is because capitalism is pushing us in the direction of green energy, because green energy is renewable. It's not a limited resource. It's really, really easy to sell right now because most people know that this is going to lower your energy costs if you have it. And most people, my power bill, by the way, for January was obscene. I don't want to pay that anymore. I want solar panels on my roof and a battery in my house so that I'm not shelling out hundreds of dollars for electricity from a big company. Yes, other nations are getting ahead of us because they've managed to combine governmental support in the way that the Biden administration did for green energy initiatives. And obviously that supercharges production. It supercharges the ability of ordinary people to adopt green technology in their home. But like, look at the writing on the wall. Like, people don't want to keep buying oil and gas. They don't want to keep spending money on it. They want to spend money on an energy solution that has costs that go down over time and that remains a resource for them that is continual and renewable. So like, Trump is losing this so hard. It's almost just, I'm just going to kick back and watch him tilt at windmills.
It also, again, puts America on the back foot, puts it behind the rest of the world. And we can't ignore the meat lobby, of course. I'm sure RFK Jr. is being lobbied hard. The same, obviously, for coal and gas and oil. That industry is lobbying Trump hard, which is why he takes such a strong position against green energy. But all of this will contribute to the slow decline of America on the world stage, not least Trump's ridiculous racist speeches at World Economic Forums. So just finally, you know, if you add all of these things up, the sum of these parts, Trump trying to move the rest of the world to the far right Christian nationalist view of the world, to ethnically cleanse the country, the lobby from the gas and oil and trying to do away with these green infrastructure projects that were already kind of paid for. And now you say they're being litigated. And then, you know, the health secretary causing huge mass confusion about flu shots and, you know, measles outbreak and everything else. I mean, all of this contributes to the decline of a nation that led the world in terms of science and medicine and doing the right thing. How serious is this? I mean, how, and what are the chances of it being restored? You know, can America find its standing in the world once again post-Trumpism? Because some are saying that this is generational, that this is, you know, even if Trump was to disappear, that this is now almost set in stone.
All right. You're asking a public defender a question about our odds of success. And you don't become a good public defender unless you understand that sometimes you're facing down incredibly daunting odds. And you can pull out a win anyway. You got to believe. I have had many a win of this kind. And so when I look at our current situation, what I say is the scale of our peril right now is exceeded only by the scale of our potential restoration. If Americans overcome the inevitable election interference that we are going to see, or at least attempts at electoral interference, the inevitable stationing of ICE at polling places and intimidation tactics and attacks on mail-in voting, you know, if Americans get it together, figure out their local rules, mail in their votes early, so that they can overcome this new postmark rule, which could result in lots of ballots being not counted as late. Like, don't wait. Organize. If Americans get it together, everything you've described this administration doing are things that people don't actually want. People don't actually want necessarily to eat beef at every meal. I say this with great sorrow since I have so many cattle rancher friends. I love you guys. But people don't necessarily want to eat beef at every meal. People don't want their healthcare costs to go through the roof. People don't want to continue relying on oil and gas when they could have much cheaper renewable energy. Like, look at the state of Wyoming that tried to ban renewable energy. And even in Wyoming, the most conservative state in the country, they couldn't get away with that because people said, nah, actually, I want the way of the future. I'm sorry. I don't want to keep working, in a gas field or necessarily in a coal mine. People don't actually want what this administration has to offer. And the shocking nature of it has caused more people to have to pay attention to politics than I think ever before.
Yes.
So if we organize, we have an opportunity to show the entire world that we as a people can be relied upon, even when our government cannot be. And I think that would be an incredible feat of restoration that is worth believing in and worth organizing for and worth fighting for in the months we have between now and November.
Okay. I'm with you because I do believe that there feels like a groundswell of activism that I haven't really seen before. And I think it's born of necessity, but I like you, have faith in people doing the right thing. For now, Emily Galvin-Almanza, thank you for joining The Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News or find my Substack, The Anthony Davis. You can also join the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.